Hey Lucky, do you want to be in a video? I'll take that as a no.
Hi there, my name is Alex, and this is the story about how I got a job after graduating from Codesmith's software engineering residency. I was supposed to make more of these videos during my time at Codesmith. Hopefully I will make more of these and talk more about my experience, but I did not. So this is going to be a little bit of a recap of what the hiring program was like, and then also just what it was like to go from applying jobs to accepting an offer. So a lot of what this is actually pulled straight from Codesmith's hiring program, and I'll link to it in the description, but there's a really good recording of the CEO Will Sentence giving a talk about how to become a software engineer. His talk is directed at software engineers, but I actually really think you can gain a lot whether you're trying to be a software engineer, get a job in tech, or really helps anyone out in the job process because it talks about how to do a lot of outreach and get your foot in the door if you don't necessarily have a connection at a company. So it's a really great resource, and I'll link to that in the description. If you don't know what Codesmith is, I do recommend watching my first video because it gives a little bit of background of the curriculum and then also a little bit more about my experience. So let's get to it. So a little bit of background on me. I actually came to Codesmith with no technical experience. I took one programming class in college that was like 7 years ago. I am pretty good with technology, and I actually did work on a team in college to build an online audio dictionary. That was a really cool project, and I'll link to that below too. But in terms of actual software engineering experience, so how I thought I would, talk about my experience, I thought I would talk about how it's really great that I have all these extra experiences. It's really great that I, didn't start my career in software engineering. I have all these really awesome experiences and skills that I can bring now that I have all this new technical knowledge. But it's actually pretty different. Codesmith, when we're going through a resume, they actually really encouraged us to take out all experience that wasn't technical. For me, it was a little bit harder than some of my other counterparts. Other, counterparts of mine had been engineers before, but I was coming from walking dogs before Codesmith. So it took me a little bit more time to find those technical pieces of my previous work experience. But something that was really cool was I actually found those kind of nuggets of technology. I worked for a coffee startup, and I helped them with a marketing tool that was actually kind of automated on Instagram. Fancy way to say Instagram bot, but that experience and kind of thinking as an engineer and being intrigued by engineering problems, I just realized were things that I could talk about. So it's really about looking at your past experiences, and instead of branding yourself as a career switcher, you brand yourself as someone who's always been interested by engineering problems. And I think it's really interesting because I was very prepared to kind of downsell my previous experiences, but finding ways where I could, talk about certain experiences that I had had before I got into the tech industry was really empowering. I'm glad I got to think about it that way. And it definitely took some practice to have that switch in mentality, and definitely had to practice my story a lot, kind of giving my elevator pitch of who I was and what I was doing. But it was really very effective when I started talking to recruiters, external recruiters, internal recruiters, or even just at networking events where people would say, hey, what do you do? So we spent the whole last week of Codesmith in lectures about building our story, about editing our resume, editing our LinkedIn and online profile. And what this brings me to is my first official interview. My first official interview was dreadful. The company was lovely, the interviewer was lovely, actually probably much kinder than he should have been, but I was a complete wreck. Yeah, I was all prepared. I had, answers to questions that I thought he was going to ask. I had, great answers to why I was interested in using Node, why I was interested in using React, but whether it was nerves or just a lack of preparation on my end, he started asking me, fairly simple questions about React, and I just totally blanked. He asked me a lot about vanilla JavaScript, and I hadn't worked on vanilla JavaScript in a really long time. I think I just got so freaked out and so nervous that my brain kind of started to shut down, and I just wasn't able to answer a lot of his questions. It got to the point where I even said, listen, I don't want to waste any more of your time. I don't recommend doing that in an interview, but I say all that to show that your first interview can be so bad, and it would have been so easy for me to just think, crap, I went through 3 months of intensive learning and I have nothing to show for it, like I'm never gonna get a job. I bombed so bad. Something that the Codesmith hiring program really focuses on is constant iteration. So constantly going through and going to interviews, making mistakes, but then learning from those mistakes so that the more experience you gain, the better you are prepared to handle situations that you might experience, whether on the job or in an interview situation. And so that's why I'm really an advocate of just going out and failing at as many interviews as you need to before you start getting better and before you start iterating on that process. And that's definitely what I did. I just went out and had as many experiences as I could, made as many mistakes as I could, and learned from them. And then what I studied then was actually the questions that I didn't feel I answered very well. Or I even emailed the person I interviewed with and said, hey, I really wasn't satisfied with my answer to this question, but I went back and I thought about it, and here it is. The other thing I did in my job search was I actually really relied on external recruiters. The difference between an internal recruiter and external recruiter is that an internal recruiter works for the company that you're applying for. They work in HR, they're a talent acquisition specialist that's employed by that company. An external recruiter, on the other hand, usually works for an agency, some kind of staffing agency that a company will hire to help them find someone to fill the role. They're both really excellent, but they do have kind of differences to working with them. The process, if you work with an internal recruiter, is usually you talk to someone in HR, then you do a tech screen, maybe you do 2 tech screens, and then you'll do an on-site. For an external recruiter, you will talk to them, and then they will, based on your experience and where they think your skill level is, and the other things you tell them, they will send your resume out to kind of a host of different clients that they have. Maybe they reached out for you for one role in particular, but as sometimes I've seen, that's not always the role that they actually end up recommending you for. The trick with external recruiters is sometimes they don't always get you the interviews with the people that they say they will. The way I kind of weeded people out is once I had that intro call, if I didn't immediately, within the next day or 2, have a phone conversation with the company themselves, not just the recruiter, then I kind of decided they weren't worth my time. But I will say that I got a job using an external recruiter, so they're not all bad, and they definitely can be really helpful, especially when you just want to have some conversations with as many people as possible, get your story down, get practice interviewing, and potentially get the chance to talk to a lot of really cool companies. For my process, for my job, I talked to an external recruiter. He was really awesome and asked me just some questions about my experience, what I'm currently working on, and the kinds of things that I'm looking for in my next role. So I got set up with a phone interview with one of the managers, and this was kind of different because sometimes when you have a first round conversation with a company, it might be with someone from HR, it might be someone who doesn't have a technical role, but for this call I was actually talking to someone who would be one of my engineering managers. So after that initial phone call with the company, I then got set up for a code review. And this was a little bit different. A lot of the times companies will put you through a tech screen where you do some live coding, whether it's over the phone, over Google Docs, or some kind of live coding website. But it was really interesting because for this company, I actually sent them some of my code, and then the tech screen was going through that code with some of their engineering team. And after that process, they had me come down for an on-site, and this on-site lasted 4.5 hours. I've not had an on-site that has lasted less than 3 hours. You usually talk to someone who would be your manager, a couple developers, a couple people from the design team, depending on how big the team is. It might sound like a cliche, but even on on-site interviews, you're really doing as much interviewing as the person interviewing you. You really want to find out if this is a company you want to work for. So questions that I like to ask companies are, 1, what's a constructive criticism you have for working here? 2, can you give a time that you made a mistake and how your coworkers and managers handled that? And just the general, what do you like working about here? Oh, another really good one is, what do you expect for this new hire after 1 month? And what do you expect of this new hire after 6 months? Because that can be drastically different for some companies. About 2 days after I had my on-site interview, I got a phone call from the manager, and at first I thought I was not going to get an offer. she said, everyone really loved meeting you, and there's a but, and I looked at my roommate and I was like, she said, we don't think you are the right fit for the role that we interviewed you for, but we think you're really great fit for the company, so we want to find a space for you. And I said, great. So what I ended up doing was accepting a contract job that I'll be contracted for them for a year. And I honestly think that's a little perfect for me. It'll be nice to have a year where I get to figure things out, test and see if I like the company. And then, you know, if I want to stay, hopefully they will be able to extend my contract. And if I don't, then I can kind of move on to the next thing. But no matter what, I'm really excited to be starting this new phase of my software engineering journey. The only thing is, I currently live in New York City, and this job is in Washington, D.C., which means I am going to be moving. So this is probably the last video that I will do with this background, but hopefully I will be making more videos where I talk about my experience on the job. I've already joined a bunch of Slack channels and looked for cool events that I can go to in DC. So I'm hoping next video that I make will be a little bit more about both my experiences in the tech meetup world in New York, and then also the new ones I'm finding in DC. So stick around for that, and see you later. One last quick thing I wanted to say is that I just read a book recently called Weapons of Math Destruction. It's a really, really awesome book by Kathy O'Neill. And we'll put a link to a description, and I think if I figure it out, you can click on it somewhere here. But yeah, thanks for watching, and hope to see you again soon. I don't know how to end this